Thank you. My name is Elisabetta. I'm from the Free University of Brussels. Regarding Word Package 3, I would like to know, have your comments about the relative importance between the animal and human neuroimaging investigation that can be performed in this. What are your expectations?
So that's a very good question. So my expectations would be is that there's some predictive measures there. So we have, let's say, some idea that that's the case, but that's actually a very a testable hypothesis. So in terms of fMRI or PET ligands or whatnot. So I think that could be a very interesting. That could be a very interesting work package for this translational part. Yeah. So I think the imaging is also very doable. It's something that we can easily implement.
Okay, but the importance of animal versus human is 50-50%, I mean? Or do you mainly focus on animals and then test a few?
Well, both. Because it's translation from animal to man and then also from man back to animal. And it's all about the validity of the model.
Do you have a feeling about where you're going in terms of, I know this is pre-competitive, so I'm not asking, but do you have a feel about where you would like to go as an industry in terms of clinical trials downstream? And I'm thinking particularly children versus adults. I mean, is this something where we're targeting autism in children, or are you thinking more in terms of adults with autism, or is that not a distinction you would make?
Well, ultimately, we want to treat children. That's where we want to go, and these are already discussions that we have in the companies on how we want to do that. And here, I have to say, we're operating in a relative vacuum because there's no CNS drugs developed for children. There are a lot of drugs used in children, but not developed for children, and that's what we're trying to do. And there are a lot of questions related to that, mainly, obviously, the safety, but then also other questions like regulatory, how, endpoints, etc. So these are fundamental questions that actually nobody has successfully addressed to date in Europe.
Sorry, I'm just following the actual.
Can you please use the microphone?
I mean, in terms of the neurobiological mechanisms we're likely to want to target, there's a difference if you're
Yes.
going for children versus adults. So to interpret what you've just said correctly or incorrectly, we're looking at developmental mechanisms in the sense that we're looking for what's actually already happening in that patient population.
Eventually, it will be, we're new in this field as well. So we're eager to learn what you think and what we think. But also there's some things that we have, let's say, that's around the corner what we can do, and there are certain things that need to be developed. And what you're hinting at is the area where that needs to be developed. And Rob is jumping from his chair to say something. Maybe the microphone can Rob again.
Yes, I really like the question because I think, if anything, it exposes differences, in the thinking within industry on how to approach this. And there's nothing wrong with the differences. It's just where we are at. There's no roadmap for what we're about to do. And so as we EFPIA members think about this space, we have to think about it both in terms of commercial opportunity, but really where the biology and the science is taking us. And although I think the pressure's really out there, both in terms of the available science and the availability of measurements used in the clinic are pushing us to pediatrics, to adolescents and older children, it's clear that the adult population is much more sizable. These patients they have typical lifespans. They're no different than typically developing individuals. Where are those patients? So I think one of the great needs, even though we may be focusing much of our thinking in development thought towards a pediatric population, there is still great disability, unmet need in the adult population. But as you bring up, the targetable biology may change, of course, along the developmental course of the illness. And so that forces us to think very differently about drug discovery and development. And I think there's plenty of opportunity within all of these work packages to address the neurodevelopmental nature of the gene-induced deficits or the progression of the disease as it interacts with the environment. But we don't, we're not working under an a priori assumption that one piece of biology will be relevant in a child and an adult. We need to understand that first before we can make that claim, before we can actually develop a plan for that. So I think there is a great need to understand, yes, the pediatric opportunities here, but I think there's a big question across the world. What is the illness look like in adults? How has the pathology changed at that point? What is tractable in terms of therapeutic biology there? We don't know that. I think there's a lot of opportunity throughout these packages to raise those questions.
Yeah, I only would like to add a little comment about that. Is certainly this is the beginning of discussion that we're going to find it once and once again, because among the community, there is a lot of discussion about the treatment for the lifespan, children and adults. And in the UK, there is a policy for adults, and many places are really demanding, firstly, the attention for adults. Then certainly, to reduce to children will be something that will require more discussion. Maybe no finish it today, but just I want to make the comment that will be something that will come once and once again during the process development of the project. The thing that I would like to ask is, can you please explain a bit more about the objective that say to identify and develop expert clinical sites across Europe to run clinical studies and trials, and so create an interactive platform for SD professionals and patients. This is important to have clear, how do you visualize those clinical sites in order to explain clearly to the people, patient organization, what that means? I mean, how do you see that working?
Well, I think this is a discussion with the applicant consortium first. And what I see as an opportunity is that what we don't have in Europe is really what like we would have in the US, where there's clearly a network of clinical sites that are linked together and actually develop programs together. And that's what I mean with this, what we mean with this work package, so that they're aligned, that they discuss their development and they specialize and talk to each other and learn from each other. And that hasn't really been implemented really across Europe, and I think there's definitely a need, and that's what we mean with this.
Can I just follow up on that point and ask a question? So there's a slight dynamic then there between obviously having a small enough manageable consortium to do the project, but then interacting with a large enough group of clinical centres to be able to get the kind of conformity and standardisation you're requiring. So I guess, rightly or wrongly, that we're looking at some kind of hub-spoke type arrangement.
What?
Sort of a hub-spoke model. So in other words, there is there are key centres in terms of partners in the programme, but they're going to reach out to multiple other centres. Is that the kind of structure you're envisaging?
Well, that's certainly an option. I think that's something that, again, I'm very curious what the applicant consortium will develop.
I'm struggling
talking
to
about
think of an
innovative
alternative,
design.
You can think of another alternative?
Well, I don't know, maybe.
No more.
Is there an ideal preferred size of consortia that you have in mind?
actually immediately
The
to the previous
size of the
speaker.
consortium.
Yeah.
That's
Because the previous speaker recommends this hub and spoke model.
Lucas is not the first one to ask that one.
No, because in the previous workshop, it was mentioned that say that centers acting as subcontractors to partners are definitely not recommended.
Yeah.
So, and that's what hub and spoke model will quickly lead to, because all those clinical centers carrying out studies want to be funded as well.
Yeah.
And that will be, you will quickly run into procedural or administrative problems, I am afraid.
Yeah.
But what is there an ideal size of the consortium?
Well, I can't answer that. I think it's really up to the applicant consortium. I think what's an optimal size. My view, if you can have my high-level view, is that it is a consortium that has a critical mass. And the critical mass is determined on what we want to deliver in the project. And if it's too big, I can see that you have to move an elephant. You know, pushing an elephant is very difficult, but pushing a mouse is very easy, but may not deliver what we want. So something in between, I think, is optimal. No, seriously, I think just to say, I think you can design a consortium that can deliver, I think, everything we have in there with a reasonable size. And having said that, we from the EFPIA side are very much aware that the call topic, how we defined it, is very ambitious. But I think being ambitious is good, because if we're not ambitious, we shouldn't start at all.
Can I just do a little bit, just a small comment also from the IMI point of view, of the evaluation. So if you think about the structure, when you will have to write your expression of interest, you will have to also describe a work plan, and you will have to describe your consortium, and the evaluator will be expressly asked to judge if they think that there is a good balance and if it makes sense that the consortium that is there is what is needed for deliver the work. And so they will have, this will be a specific question that we will ask to our evaluator. Have these people put together a consortium that is really going to deliver what they say they are going to do? So I think really think the work and think your team in parallel really, and try to make them the best fit.
I think in terms of the consortium, we can divide it in the group of specialized people who work in animal model, in vitro model, and developing. That will be quite easy to see. But in the Work Package 4, could be a very tricky aspect, because there is a hunger in Europe. You asked me, for instance, Europe is a very kind of special place as well, because it's multicultural, it's multilingual. Any project in Europe, to be reasonable pilot, has to be at least 6 to 7 countries with different culture, and that richness as well gives us a lot of genetical differences, a lot of cultural difference, a lot of risk factors that could be involved in this. And you ask me, can you get 12 countries or 14 countries with university, parents organization, everything ready to work? I will say yes, no problem. People are waiting for that. Then, what size you want in this? And people from different cultures, from Eastern, Nordic, Mediterranean, Western, and the consortium could be a kind of big issue in terms of developing. And the people are just waiting for the opportunity to a right proposition to start working on this.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thank you.
I have a very practical question.
Yeah.
To develop novel essays, it's very useful to have some molecules you may have in your fridge or your freezer in a company.